Okay.
Woo! Thank you, and we are done. Thank you very much.
So, my name is Tane.
I'm Gus, and we're Future Crunch.
And we're here tonight because we think science is fucking amazing. It is the basis of the technology upon which we rely. Now, we would love to stand up here and nerd out about all the cool things happening at the frontiers of science and technology, but today, we are just going to keep it to science and the health and biotech. And in the future, technology is going to be a lot more efficient than this. All right. So my background, just to give you a little bit of what I do, I'm a bioinformatician. So basically I deal with big data in the biological realm. Currently doing my PhD in cancer research at Peter MacCallum. So I'm looking at biomarkers and how we can use them to identify early signs of disease and how we can monitor it through time to better improve the treatment and diagnosis of those who are affected with cancer.
My background's in economics, so I did my PhD in that subject, but I gave it up because economics is a pseudoscience, and so I thought that real science would be a lot more interesting. And so what I do now is I'm the Australian manager of the largest social hackathon in Australia called Random Hacks of Kindness. And we connect volunteer technologists with charities and community groups to create open source solutions to social challenges.
A transformation of medicine is underway. We're moving from a science of treating disease to a science of improving health. It's a more holistic approach, and it's much more complex, interconnected, and more exciting than we ever thought before. Now, this largely started with the sequencing of the first human genome. Now, in the beginning, it took 13 years and $3.5 billion to complete. But today, I crunch human genetic data every day in my job. For example, this is an Illumina gene chip. We can fit 5 people's human genome, the code of life, which builds us from the atomic level up. And to sequence one person today, it costs about $1,500. So that's exponential growth. Today, we can use your genetic code to determine what type of medication you should take and how it will affect you. Genetic testing is already mandatory in Kuwait, and Discovery, an insurance company that Gus used to use in South Africa, now provides this service for free for its clients. Now recently, using genetic information, Craig Venter, the lovely bald man that you saw on Time magazine, he has created the simplest, most minimal form of life from 473 genes, a synthetic bacteria. This is a cluster of them. And what this tells us is it gives us the basis of what is needed for life to be. And also, they don't even know what a third of these genes do, but they're common to all life. So boiling these down to the fundamentals will really give us insight into what it means to create life from the molecular level up.
So that's a bit of a brief intro into what we're really going to be talking here about tonight. The title of our talk was Biotech, or the future of biotech, but I think that Tane and I have been talking about it a little bit, and we decided that we actually don't like the word biotech because it suggests that biology and technology are two separate things, that living systems and the things that we create with technology should somehow be thought of as separate categories. And so maybe the term that we should use for tonight's talk as we start to explore these kinds of things is the science fiction term, which is wetware. I think a lot of the stuff we talk about here at things like BuzzConf is about software and hardware. As technologists, they're the kinds of things that we're comfortable with. But I think, as we'll show you tonight, the stuff that's going on with wetware really is the synthesis of not only software and hardware, but entire living systems. And that makes it incredibly profound, and the potential for transformation is huge. And we hope that you'll hopefully all share our excitement about it too. So moving on there from Tane, really this all starts from what Tane was talking about, which was that first sequencing of the human genome. And what's interesting about where we're at now is that that's just the start, because once we'd found out what the human genome did, we started investigating what happens around the human genome. And we discovered that the stuff around your human genome, which is called epigenetics, has just as much, if not even more of an effect on how genetics plays out. So the way to think of this is that we used to think about genetics as, people used to think DNA was the recipe for human life. But what we now know is that DNA is more like the ingredients list, and epigenetics is like the instructions list for what you do with the ingredients. How long you bake something for, how long you put it in the oven for. Another way of thinking about it is that if a butterfly and a caterpillar share the same genetic code, then what is it that tells that butterfly or caterpillar to transform? And the answer is epigenetics. It's the environmental factors that are around the genome that really determine how these things play out. And that means that things like the environment, health, exercise, things around us matter far more than we used to think. Your destiny is not preordained in your genes. It's the classic argument of nature and nurture combined. It means that you are literally, it means that things like food, for example, can literally be thought of as information. So every time that you eat something, that food has a set of information in it that tells your genes, how to express, that sends out molecular signals, tells your genes whether to produce different chemicals that regulate your immune system, other factors that affect your health, which means that the old saying, you are what you eat, is literally true. So we have these, old sayings which science has given new meaning to as well.
So it turns out that the fundamental understanding of who we are has actually been flawed for a long time. It turns out that most of us is in fact not even us. So bacteria cells are 10 times more prevalent in our body than our own cells. That means we're actually 90% alien. We're like an entire planet, an ecosystem of trillions of bacteria and other microorganisms that are all working together symbiotically or fighting it out, that ultimately dictate both our physical and emotional health. This is known as our microbiome. And it can be disrupted by what we eat, what we touch, who we get frisky with. It's as if like two planets collide, and all those frisky bacteria jump ship and repopulate the new planet. Now, new ventures, such as the Human Microbiome Project, which is taking place all over the world, are trying to sequence all of these little critters that inhabit us and literally make us. And once we do that and understand their genetics and their epigenetics, it will completely revolutionize the way we understand health and what we know prevents and maintains health.
And so what all that means is that as we increasingly gain control over our genetic sequencing ability, as we gain control over epigenetics and we start to understand that better, for example, with epigenetics, what we're doing now is we're now able to change what's around a cell and make it reverse itself so that it can become a stem cell. So that if you give instructions to the stuff around a cell, it rewinds its programming effectively to become an original stem cell. That is new technology that became available probably about 2 months ago. So we're gaining increased ability at the molecular level of life to be able to manipulate and to influence it. And what that means is that we're starting to think about health in a completely different way. And probably the most profound shift in that is in how we're thinking about aging. Because we used to think about aging as an inevitable part of our even more inevitable march towards death. But with this ability to manipulate things at the atomic level and even further down in our bodies, we're starting to think about aging as a disease. And if aging is, and that disease is caused by the accumulation of physical, social, and cultural factors over time. And what happens is that eventually those factors build up to such a point that you fall over, your body can no longer hold itself up, despite it doesn't matter how much medicine you pump into yourself. And if thought about that way, then aging is the biggest killer of people. Of the roughly 150,000 people around the world that die every day, 2/3 die of age-related causes. But thanks to these new forms of medicine, we're starting to hack aging. 3 scientists in Philadelphia removed senescent cells from mice.
What that meant is that it's a pretty simple concept. They took the old cells in the aging mice out, and what they found was that senescent cells affected the cells that were around them as well. So if you remove just a few senescent cells, you can restore health back to an aging mouse very quickly. And in these mice, they were able to extend the lifespan by about 35% through removing just a few aging cells. So that's where that's one of the most exciting things happening on the frontiers of this research. And it means that over the next decade or two, we're really going to see a complete transformation in our aging populations. It means that we're going to be living longer, fitter, and healthier lives. And it means that we're going to start thinking very, very differently about what human beings are capable of over the ages of, say, 70, 80, 90, and even 100. It means that one day, all of us might, for example, have the ability to run the 100 meters just like the Golden Bulls. And that's an incredibly exciting prospect.
I mean, one thing that totally blows my mind is that for every day that we live on linear trends, we gain 6 hours extra of life expectancy. That's just crazy. So, all right, basically, welcome to the age of personalized medicine. So, given our knowledge of genetics, epigenetics, proteomics, our microbiome, and our control over the aging process, we're merely moving into a world where doctors are going to completely change the way they work and the way that they treat us. In the 2020s, they already have plans to have genetic medicine clinics where they create medicine based on your specific genome. And once we have USB-size genetic sequencers, like the Mini Ion, which already exists, now these come down in price and they start to spread around to the most remote places in the world, then you really have a true democratic spreading of our understanding of our health and what it means to be human.
It means that in the future you'll be able to go buy a genetic sequencing test from the pharmacy in the same way that you do now for a pregnancy test, which will tell you whether you've got good bacteria on your kitchen counter or what breed your cat is, or whether your child is going to be good at sports. Personal DNA stories will be the stuff of dinner party chit-chat, and we'll all be swapping stories about how our genome was probed when we go home for Christmas. It means that we'll be able to take our genetic code and grow ourselves mutants. And that sounds like science fiction as well, but this is a company called Epibone which is already doing that. They take your stem cells and they're able to grow a completely new bone from it. So that's sort of where we're at now. But if the big revolution of the last decade was everything that happened in genetics, then the big revolution of this decade is something known as CRISPR-Cas9, which many of you will have heard about already. And it was invented by two biologists, Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, back in 2012. And very simply, it's like a cut and paste tool for DNA. It means that we can now literally snip out any piece of DNA that we want to, and we can insert any new piece of DNA. And the stuff they're doing is incredible. So this year already, scientists have used it to save the life of this toddler, Layla Richards, in the UK from leukemia. They removed the gene. About 3 weeks ago, they were able to remove the HIV virus from a cell for the first time ever. And crucially, when they put that cell back into its environment with other HIV-infected cells, the cell didn't get reinfected because the piece of genetic code that had been removed meant that it could no longer have the virus transmitted to it. That's where we are now with genetic testing. We have the complete ability to manipulate genetic data, and we can cut and paste it at will.
So actually CRISPR, as we once knew it, is getting old, because a few weeks ago they announced CRISPR-I, which is CRISPR interference, which is sort of an augmented way of using CRISPR to control our epigenetics. So they use a similar CRISPR-Cas9 protein to latch onto the DNA, and this now allows us to not cut and paste or remove or add genes, but actually to control our epigenetics, so the amplification or turning down of our genes. This will have huge implications because we can do this in our body on the fly. It doesn't require cells to be taken out and no chopping and changing. So, in April last year, Chinese scientists were the first ones to edit, using CRISPR, a non-viable human embryo. Now, understandably, the scientific community and the general public freaked out because editing human genetic material that can be passed on through inheritance is a pretty scary thing. And in the UK, they've just now legalized doing this type of research. But let me ask you this. If your child had an increased chance, like an 80, 90% chance of Alzheimer's, cancer, or another debilitating disease, and you could easily and cheaply do something about it, what would you do? I certainly would do something about it. And it's very likely in the future our grandkids will be embryo screened and germline edited. Now, this isn't going to change what it means to be human. It's going to be more like a vaccine, a method to eradicate disease and improve the quality of life.
What is likely to change what it might mean to be human is the incredible stuff going on in brain research at the moment. Countries like the US, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, China, and Norway have announced billions of dollars in brain research funding in this particular initiative called the Brain Initiative. And what they're doing is they're trying to reverse engineer the human brain. They're trying to map every single neuron in our brain, which is the most advanced biological machine we know of in the universe. And once they've done that, it'll have profound implications for the way that we use our brains to interact with technology. That kind of research is already playing out in the real world. We already have a much greater understanding of how it works. For example, here at Monash University, they have something called the Bionic Eye Project, which is a device that literally plugs into the brainstem of blind people and then transmits an image from the front camera into the brainstem, which allows them to see again. That's a technology from Star Trek, but that's where we're already at. And in December last year, this guy called Les Bao, a man from Minnesota, became the first ever human being to be able to directly control his prosthetic limbs using the power of his mind alone. So the electronic signals that they're detecting from his brain are transmitted straight into those robotic sensors, and it allows him to move his arms like a normal person.
So machine-to-brain interfacing, which is what it's called, also allows for a form of telepathy. So in September of 2014, scientists in Barcelona got a man in India to send words to a woman in France using brain signals. I mean, personally, it scares the shit out of me, even the remote possibility that my mother could ever know what I was thinking. But what it means is that being able to augment and improve our brain function and to be able to communicate in a completely different way is no longer science fiction. And indeed, there are already a multitude of companies offering cognitive, motor, and sensory improvements with many devices, as well as being able to alter our emotions.
These guys just got $13 million of Series A funding a few months ago. And what it means is that with a jolt of electricity, you can enter a flow state that allows you to learn a new skill twice as fast. It means that you can relax in a crowded room, or it means that you can do an all-nighter if you've got a huge project in front of you. And further down the line, once we start implanting these devices into our brains, the possibilities are almost limitless.
All right, moving from the brain to the body. Pretty soon in the future, we will have a bunch of nanobots inside of our body, looking at a variety of different molecular signs of our health and early signs of disease. For example, projects like Google X have already assembled a team of over 100 people from different disciplines with the hope of realizing their dream of early detection using nanotechnology of cancer. And this will spread over into multiple diseases as well. They also have plans to have little nanobots that go through your arteries and remove nasty free radicals and scour out all that plaque. Now, this may seem quite invasive to many people, having a bunch of nanobots relaying signals inside you. It might seem strange. However, we already use this type of technology in many other fields. For example, modern-day Boeing engines use over 5,000 sensors to monitor the engine. And if they show a sign of a problem, the plane is grounded before it falls out of the sky. Why wouldn't we do that for ourselves?
So just to kind of wrap this all up and try and bring it all together, you'll see that this is where we're at now. The way we still think about these technologies is that we have technology over here and we have biology over here. And in some cases, we're using technology to affect biology. In other cases, we are using biology to affect technology. But where we're going in the future, let me just posit a sort of little roadmap for you about where we go from here. Obviously, most people in this audience will be aware of the momentous events that happened a few weeks ago in artificial intelligence research. And what's interesting about that was that the breakthrough in that artificial intelligence came when they modeled the AI on what was called neural networks. So when they took inspiration for biology to effectively to change the software of the AI, that meant that the AI became far more efficient at doing things like intuitive computing and in pattern recognition. And so what that means is that software, which is something we think about as separate, is in effect becoming more like biology. Here's another one. Think about hardware. And the classic sort of hardware poster child, if you like, is drones. What was a hobbyist pursuit 9 years ago with Chris Anderson building drones on the kitchen table with his kids is now a multi-billion-dollar industry. And where they're going, I was listening to an interview on O'Reilly Hardware podcast last night, and what Chris Anderson said, where they're going, their vision is that they want to eventually get drones, thousands of drones, mapping every single element in the world, every single physical item, every single physical location will be mapped using 3D scanning technology. And eventually what happens is you have this sort of swarm intelligence as all these drones go out. And once they map our entire environment, they come back and upload that all into the cloud. And so we have a digitized version of our entire planet down to, incredibly small levels that's all available in digital format, incredible amounts of data. And of course, what is that similar to? And the answer is bees. In the sense that what bees do is when they get to a new location, they send out all their drones and their workers, and then they come back and transmit using messages to the whole hive what is actually going on and what's out there. So software becomes more like biology makes software more like biology. Software becomes more like biology. Hardware becomes more like biology, and where we eventually end up is in the entire synthesis of both of them.
Well, if you really think about it, fundamentally life is an information technology. At our molecular level, we are IT. Our bodies are built, and all organisms are built in the hope of propagating this information technology. That is why we're here. All our emotions, love, and feelings are basically based on propagating this information. And that's not to boil it down to something unemotional and boring. It's incredibly complex and amazing. But, for example, MIT just created a programming language which allows them to code complex life DNA circuits and insert them into cells with precision to get life to do what you want it to do. Now, currently, this is only a programming language at the bacteria level, but this will quickly scale up to more complex life forms. Currently, as we sit here, the textbooks of biotechnology, health, and about life itself are currently being rewritten. We think it's an exciting time to be alive. And thank you for listening.
Thanks very much.